Hey everyone, with Poetry Month right around the corner, I wanted to go ahead and share 4 reasons that you should be teaching poetry in a K-2 classroom. Now, I'm sure most of you already incorporate poetry in one way or another in your classroom, but I think in this video you'll pick up at least a tip or two to use it maybe a little more purposefully. If you're new here, my name is Susan Jones. I'm a former first grade and K-2 literacy teacher, and now I spend a lot of time here on YouTube sharing videos every Thursday and Sunday with teachers just like you. So if you want a bunch of ready to implement tips coming right to you, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you get notified of every single video. Let's dive into those tips. Okay, tip number 1 for using poetry in your classroom is that it promotes phonological awareness. Now, under phonological awareness is rhyming, and poetry is great to use for students to be able to identify and also produce some rhymes. Now, I did make an entire rhyming video, it looks like this one right here, that if you're looking for separate rhyming activities, you can check that out, but using poems is a great way to do that as well. Usually when we read a poem with my classroom, we spend a few days on it. Sometimes I will blow it up and write it down on a piece of paper. Sometimes I will put it in sentence strips to display, and we will read it over and over again. Because of the easy rhythm that happens when students are reading poems, it's pretty simple to identify those rhyming words because they usually happen at the end of a line. As students become more familiar listening to the poem, they actually can know when that rhyme is going to happen, and it helps them identify where those rhyming words are. If you've gone ahead and written it out either on a chart paper or did the sentence strips, you can have different students come up and point to pairs of rhyming words. As you read it aloud to the class, students can clap when they hear the rhyming words or snap, whatever you want them to do. And then you can even take it one step further. If it's written out, what I would do after reading the poem a couple times already, maybe the next day or the third day you have this poem up for this class, I would go ahead and cover some of the rhyming words. So if it's a pair, I would maybe cover that second rhyming word first. And then I would read the line so students know the first line and they can hear that word at the end. And then when you read the second one, you can ask students, what should go here? And they will have to produce that next rhyming word. Now, many of our students will be able to do this from memory because they've already heard that rhyme before, because they've heard the poem before, but you could also ask, is there another word that would fit in there? Can they produce any other rhyming words that might fit in the poem to keep its rhythm? Simple rhyming activities like this one are a great place to start. They're really a great way to get students really developing their phonological awareness, which is the foundation of their reading. Now, I should mention, if you are looking for some kid-friendly poems, I like to go to poets.org. They have a whole section there that says poems kids like, and they are short, they are fun, and they are great for students to read. All right, reason number 2 you should be teaching poetry in a K-2 classroom is it helps students with their visualization. Now, visualizing is a comprehension strategy where students are able to think about what they're reading and make a mental image in their head of what is happening. And poets often use great sensory language, which really helps students see and feel and hear what's happening inside the poem. It often elicits a lot of emotion from students, and they're able to draw upon that to create a picture. Now, using that poets.org site that I shared earlier, you could really pull up any kid-friendly poem, and first I would definitely have students listen to it aloud. And then I would have them maybe close their eyes and listen to it again. And then I would explain the visualization process, and I would have them listen one more time before using a blank piece of paper to draw what they've seen or what they heard in the poem. This will not only help them enjoy the poem a little bit more, but then it is more fun for students to be able to make connections, draw on what they're seeing in their head, and draw it down on paper. Once the visualizations are drawn, that's a whole nother fun talking point, because I love pointing out how our visualizations can be slightly different and very person to person based on how we connected with the poem we read. I love having my students make visualizations with the poems we read because it helps me really see if they understand what they're reading. In fact, I do this often with our phonics poems. I have a bunch of phonics poems. We usually do one per week where students will read a poem that's usually pretty easy to decode, and they're really focusing on a phonics pattern. But I have 2 versions of it. I have one version where it has a little image in the corner, but sometimes I will switch it up with the visualization option that looks looks like this. Here you can see the phonics pattern is E-E, long E, and students would read the poem, Bee and sheep got in their Jeep, they drove all night and didn't sleep. One wheel fell off and rolled away, they beeped the horn the rest of the way. Just like with any other poem, I would have students read it with me. Maybe we would echo read it, choral read it. They would identify those EE words before they went ahead and visualized the poem. Again, I want them reading and rereading the poem for them to then go ahead and know it well enough to create their own mental image. Okay, reason number 3 for using poetry in a K-2 classroom is it is great for students to practice their fluency and intonation. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but with both of my first 2 reasons, I talk about reading and rereading that poem many different times. The more we read something, the more we become fluent with it, and poetry is such a fun thing to read that students really enjoy reading it over and over. Because poetry has such a natural rhythm, students are really able to read the poem over and over and practice their appropriate rise and fall of their voice as they read. A lot of poems also don't have punctuation, or maybe it's a little flexible with the punctuation rules, so students can also practice appropriate phrasing when they read as well. They practice, the correct places to stop and take a breath, when they should take a longer breath, and it's just a fun way for students to become more fluent readers. Tip number 4. Reason number 4 for using poetry in a K-2 classroom is that it inspires writing. Now, students tend to love reading poetry because it's fun, it's whimsical. A lot of times students will notice that poems are pretty short. Unlike the other types of writing that are very structured, like writing a personal narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end, we learn pretty quickly that poetry can come in all sorts of forms. There's rhyming poetry, there's list poetry, there's shape poetry. Poetry is never ending, right? There's so many different ways you can do it, and this kind of inspires a little bit of fun in your students, and they want to start trying it themselves. By taking different poems that you read aloud as a class, you can go ahead and switch up that poem. Kind of like we did in reason number 1, where students produce their own rhyme. Maybe you want to take out both of those rhyming words, and you as a class want to switch it up and kind of create your own stanza for that poem. Maybe as a class, you and your students want to write a list poem, or a shape poem, or an acrostic poem. Those are pretty simple to follow along, and again, students can see that they don't need to have such strict rules. They can kind of just be fun, and the ideas don't need to be as connected in a more structured way like a typical sentence and paragraph. Now, I actually like this reason for using poetry so much that I am dedicating my next video all to teaching students how to write poetry. So be on the lookout for that, because I'm going to share some easy tips and ideas that will help your students get started writing poetry. And depending on when you're watching this, if that video is already out, it will be linked down in the description, so you can go ahead and watch that. So there you have it. There are 4 of my top reasons for using poetry in a K-2 classroom. And just because I didn't mention it earlier, I do want to share 2 of my favorite authors for kids poetry are Shel Silverstein, of course, and also Jack Prelutsky. I love his poems. I think they are so funny and kids really like them too. So in the comments, I will actually drop some of my favorite poetry books that I like to use with students, or like that site poets.org. I'll list that down in the description too, so you can check it out. If you have other favorite authors that you love to use when teaching poetry, please drop them in the comments so we can all see them. As always, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up so I know, and make sure you're subscribed to my channel. That way you can see every new video on Thursdays and Sunday. See you next time. Bye.